I'm Evelyn Welch. I'm Dean of the Arts Faculty, and it's my privilege to chair this panel on the creative industries and the rise and fall of reality television. I have to say that Queen Mary has never invited the cameras in to do a reality TV program on us until perhaps today there. But we are very privileged to have Richard Schoch and Stefano Harney from our drama and our departments of Business and Management, School of Business and Management here, a sign of the kind of collaboration that we can create in the sector of the humanities and social sciences. I think it's a very unusual institution where we have such close connections across such a wide range of disciplinary areas there. So without further ado, Richard and Stefano are going to speak for about 5 minutes each on the rise and fall of reality television. They might then ask each other a few questions, and then we'll open it out to the audience. And we have the usual roving mics there. So, Richard.
Thank you, Evelyn. And Joe, thanks very much for inviting me to be here today on the reality TV panel. I thought I'd start with an anecdote. About 4 years ago, I was asked to be a judge on a reality television show called Faking It, which some of you may know. It's where someone sort of learns a trade or a skill, like being a chef, and then after a week, you're paired with 2 real chefs, and then you have to do your thing in front of a panel of expert judges, and the judges have to decide who's faking it amongst the 3. So the session for Faking It that the producer had in mind was on striptease, or as it's called in cultural studies, burlesque artiste. Some years earlier, I had written a book on burlesque, meaning, of course, 19th century literary parody, not striptease. But the producers didn't care. All they focused on was the word burlesque. So they called me up and said, "We hear that you, Richard Schoch, are the best scholar in the UK on burlesque." And I said, "I'm the only scholar in the UK on burlesque. We want you for Faking It." Great. I said, "How much are you going to pay?" And they said, well, nothing. Surely you would want to be part of our reality television show for the fun of it. And I said, "Surely not. You want to hire me for my expertise, you should pay for it." So right away, I clearly misunderstood what reality television was about. It's not about expertise, it's about the desire for exposure or celebrity. Not fame, celebrity. So I was a disaster at reality TV from the beginning. But I think one of the reasons that they asked someone from drama to be here today was that the terms like reality and realism and the real are probably the most central terms of the history of drama and dramatic criticism. I want to briefly mention 2 anecdotes from the history of drama that I think have some bearing upon reality TV today. About 100 years ago, when Konstantin Stanislavski was directing the original productions of Chekhov, Chekhov in The Cherry Orchard or The Seagull had written a scene where crickets chirp. And Stanislavski, the sort of god of the real in the theater, said, "We must have real crickets on the stage of the Moscow Art Theater." Real crickets were brought in. Of course, they were a disaster. They didn't chirp when you wanted them to. They chirped when you didn't want them to. It was a wreck. What you wanted was a soundtrack of crickets chirping. You wanted editorial control. You wanted reality effect, not the real. 50 years later, Blanche Dubois, in Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire, said something similar. One of her best lines is, "I don't want realism, I want magic." And this seems to me what reality television does. Under the guise of the real or the reality effect, it gives you magic, because magic is what you want. And for the participants, the magic is the allure of fame and celebrity. They don't want to be real, they want to be unreal through the guise of fame and recognition. Evelyn.
Thank you very much, Richard. Stefano.
Thanks. I was initially reluctant to be part of the panel because I don't watch that much reality television, but I realized after a while that it wasn't important whether or not I watched reality television so much as it was important about whether reality television was watching me. And of course it is, and it tells us a lot about our changing conditions, in particular, our changing conditions of work. And when I say it's watching us, I don't just mean in the sense that at the outset of reality television, it was predicted that finally Warhol would be right and everyone would get their 15 minutes of fame, but rather because the real reality television is obviously CCTV camera, and we are all watched all the time through it. But more importantly, what we've learned is to be watched. And that's quite important when it comes to reality television, I think. It's worth prefacing by saying that, you know, at the business school that I teach at, we focus a lot on work. And in particular, we focus on what we would call a kind of duty of care to the worker, in the same way that a medic might have a duty of care to a patient, or a barrister might have a duty of care to the accused. Now, a few years ago, that might have been a bit unfashionable, but in the recent crisis, it becomes quite clear that if there is one set of people in this world who doesn't have anybody looking after them, obviously it's people who work, and that includes pretty much everybody. We look at the way work changes, and reality television tells us a lot about the way work changes. If you think about what happens in reality television, you can see some of the positive things that happen in work, but you can also see a lot of the things that we're concerned about, a lot of the new kinds of exploitation, a lot of the new kinds of problems that come with work. So think about what happens in reality television. Well, the first thing is you volunteer yourself. I know this myself because I go on CNBC as a volunteer. I waste all my time to go on and get my 2 minutes and try to make an intervention that's important. But I spend a lot of my time to do that. So people from reality television volunteer. Think of the absurd version of the boy and his balloon recently on the news, in which, in order to try to get the attention of reality television, they went through all these elaborate steps to hoax this balloon escapade. Not only that, people wait around a lot in reality television, right? They sit around a lot. People judge each other a lot in reality television, and people perform a lot in reality television. These are all aspects of the way work has changed. Work's become more precarious. We have to wait around for it. Work's become more precarious. We have to volunteer for it sometimes. Think of the world of internships, the vast growing world of internships right inside creative industries, in which people volunteer in order to get into work for longer and longer periods. And indeed, in much of continental Europe, that period never ends now in arts internships. Think about the question of performance. Well, there are positive ideas of performance. It's great that somebody's interested in all of me when I go into work. But that's not an option either. You know, all of you is required in work. The entire performance is now required at work as well. So I think reality television is not obviously a direct material reflection of what's going on in work, but of course it captures the structure of feeling that is at work in our world of work today, and therefore is something that we end up studying. And the final thing to say about it, of course, is that in order for us to get some idea about what is going on in work in our business school, it's been absolutely vital for us not to look at work directly, but in fact to look at things like reality television, in fact to look at things that seem at a remove from what traditional business schools would look at. But I'd say, you know, in our own defense, that we're the only school that said there was a crisis coming of the London schools. The rest of them went blissfully along, looking at business, failing to understand all the crises that we're building that have now culminated in the current one. So we think, far from being unfashionable, that actually to pay some attention to work is quite a fashionable thing to do at this moment, and quite an important thing. And you can find instances of work at work in a lot of different spaces, and reality television is certainly one of them.
Evelyn, thank you. Could you tell us a little bit about the kind of economies of scale of reality television?
Well, one of the reasons that reality TV exists at all is because it's ridiculously cheap. And in a market of multi-channel television, cable and satellite, the mainstream terrestrial channels have to compete all the more for their coveted audience numbers. So what you want to do is produce cheaply. Reality television shows, hour per hour, are about 4 to 8 times less expensive than an hour of traditional drama. They're also outsourced. They're done by independent production companies, which sort of lowers the cost and also lowers the risk for the mainstream channels. They can sort of work with menus presented to them by the production companies.